It's a bright Tuesday morning, and Karoline Leavitt stands confidently behind the desk in the bustling studio of a live political talk show. The lights shine down intensely, the cameras roll with precision, and the audience waits in eager anticipation. Her role as the host is clear: to facilitate conversation, ask hard-hitting questions, and keep the debate alive. Today, the focus is on a controversial figure, a woman who has divided opinions across the country. Bishop Mary and Buddy. If you're enjoying this video, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest content. Karoline has done her research thoroughly. She knows this is no ordinary interview. Mary and Buddy is a bishop, someone who holds significant sway in both religious and social communities. She's been a public figure for years, particularly known for her outspoken advocacy for LGBT+ rights and immigrants, which has drawn both admiration and criticism from different segments of society. But what many people don't know is her deeper involvement with government-funded programs and her ties to controversial organizations. Karoline is prepared not just with the usual questions, but with insights into the allegations that surround her guest. The studio is alive with energy as Karoline's voice breaks through the chatter, her tone smooth but firm as she introduces the show's topic. Today, we dive deep into the story of a woman who claims to fight for justice and equality, but has recently come under scrutiny for her financial ties and her role in various politically charged movements. Let's find out what Mary and Buddy really stands for. The camera shifts to Mary and Buddy, seated across from Karoline. Her calm demeanor belies the tension that hangs in the air. Mary smiles faintly as Karoline begins her questions. "So, Bishop Buddy," Karoline begins, her voice measured, "you've made headlines for advocating on behalf of LGBTQ+ individuals and immigrants. You've often positioned yourself as a protector of the vulnerable, but recently there have been claims about your involvement with groups receiving substantial federal funding, including from USAID. How do you respond to those claims?" The question lands with precision. Mary shifts in her seat, her hands clasped in front of her, maintaining her composed appearance. "Well, Karoline, my work has always been about compassion. I believe in supporting the marginalized, whether they are refugees, LGBT+ individuals, or those who have been cast aside by society. The funding I've received is simply a reflection of the need for these programs. We are doing good work, important work." Karoline nods but doesn't let the answer slide. "But some would argue that the programs you support promote policies that go against the values many Americans hold dear. You've received millions of dollars from USAID. Is this funding really being used to support the communities you claim to help? Or is it being funneled into furthering a particular political agenda?" Mary pauses, and for a moment, there's a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. She's no stranger to controversy, but this is a different kind of question, one that challenges her credibility. "I'm not here to discuss politics, Karoline," she responds, her voice calm, though there's an edge to her words. "I'm here to talk about the people we're helping. I'm here to defend those who need us." Karoline doesn't back down. "But aren't your political beliefs intertwined with your religious stance? Aren't the policies you advocate for directly tied to the funding you receive?" The audience listens intently. Karoline is a seasoned host, and she knows how to navigate these conversations. She's not interested in letting Mary sidestep the critical questions. This isn't just about religion or politics. It's about the integrity of organizations receiving taxpayer money. The camera zooms in on Mary as she prepares her response. She's used to pressure, but this feels different. Karoline is digging deeper than most journalists, and the stakes are higher than a mere soundbite. The public's trust is on the line, and Mary knows she has to be careful with her words. She's worked hard to cultivate a reputation as a champion for marginalized communities. But now that reputation is being questioned. "I'm proud of the work we've done," Mary finally says, her voice steady. "And I'm proud of the partnerships we've formed to help those in need. The funding we receive is fully transparent and used to support people, not political agendas." Karoline remains unconvinced. She's done her homework, and she knows that many of the organizations Mary has been linked with have faced scrutiny for their financial practices. These are not just small-time charities. These are organizations with significant influence. Karoline decides to push further. "But what about the allegations that some of these organizations have obscured their ties to federal funding? That they've changed their names to avoid detection in the public spending database? Isn't that a form of deceit? Caroline's voice is sharp, her eyes locked on Mary's. The room goes silent. Mary's composure falters for a split second, but she quickly recovers. These are baseless accusations, Caroline. We are doing everything by the book. The work we do is legitimate, and we have nothing to hide. Caroline leans forward, her eyes piercing. But you see, Bishop Buddy, this isn't just about helping people. It's about how those people are being used. You're playing a role in something much bigger than yourself, and it's not just about what's right for your congregation or the people you serve. It's about what's right for the American people who are unknowingly funding these activities. The tension in the room is palpable. Caroline's questions are relentless, and Mary is now on the defensive. The stakes are high, and both women know it. As the interview unfolds, the truth of the situation starts to emerge. The deeper Caroline digs, the more complex the story becomes. What is the real agenda behind the funding Mary receives? Is it truly helping those in need, or is it part of a larger political strategy? As the first part of the interview draws to a close, Caroline knows this is just the beginning. The story is far from over, and the revelations are only just starting to surface. There's more to uncover, and Caroline will stop at nothing to get to the truth. As the cameras continue to roll, Karoline Leavitt tightens her grip on the microphone, her gaze never leaving Bishop Maryann Buddy. The room is heavy with tension, and Caroline knows that this interview is about to take a turn for the more revealing. Mary's earlier response was deflective, and Caroline is determined to push further into the heart of the issue. You mentioned earlier, Caroline begins, her voice still calm but laced with authority, that the funding you receive is fully transparent. But there are records showing that significant amounts of taxpayer money have been funneled into organizations that seem to operate under a veil of secrecy. These organizations aren't just focused on religious outreach. They're involved in political movements, social justice causes, and, as some critics claim, even attempting to reshape national policies. Mary's eyes narrow slightly, and for the first time in the interview, there's a flicker of frustration behind her cool exterior. Carolyn, she says, her tone more controlled now, we have been involved in helping people in need. This is not about politics. It's about making sure that no one is left behind, whether they're immigrants, LGBTQ+ individuals, or anyone else who is marginalized. Caroline leans forward, her gaze unwavering. But Bishop, when you advocate for policies that align closely with political ideologies, especially those that are at the heart of major societal debates, it's hard not to see the political undertones. You are not just preaching compassion, you are pushing for a radical transformation of the way our society views basic issues of identity, rights, and governance. The bishop stays silent for a moment, clearly gathering her thoughts. She's been in the spotlight before, but this interview feels different. Caroline is digging deeper than any interviewer she's faced in the past, and the stakes are growing higher with each question. You can call it political all you want, Mary responds, her voice taking on a defensive edge. But at the end of the day, it's about love and acceptance. It's about creating a society that embraces everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Isn't that what we should be doing as a nation? Caroline does not flinch. But when you use federal funds, taxpayer money, to advance these ideas, don't you have an obligation to be transparent about where that money's going and what it's being used for? A slight pause fills the room before Mary answers, but her response is no less firm. We have always used our resources to help the most vulnerable. I have no interest in playing political games. My goal is to provide care, compassion, and support. Caroline raises an eyebrow. Then why have reports surfaced claiming that organizations linked to you and your church have been altering their names to obscure the federal funds they are receiving? Why the secrecy? It's hard to believe this is just about providing care if you're actively trying to hide the money trail. The question hits like a punch. Caroline's eyes are locked on Mary's, her posture intense, waiting for an answer. Mary's expression hardens, but she remains poised. These are false claims, Mary says sharply, her words losing some of the calmness they once held. These accusations are politically motivated. We've never hidden anything. Our programs are legal, above board, and have always been transparent. Caroline leans back in her chair, her voice lowering, but the intensity in her words hasn't softened. Mary, understand that this is a delicate issue, but the public has a right to know. These organizations aren't just handing out aid, they're shaping the future of this country. So the question remains, who stands to gain from this? Is it the vulnerable people you claim to protect? Or is it an entirely different agenda? A heavy silence follows Caroline's question. The camera cuts to a close-up of Mary, her fingers lightly tapping the desk in front of her, a subtle sign of her discomfort. The air between the two women crackles with tension. Caroline is relentless, and Mary knows that she's running out of room to maneuver. Mary adjusts her position slightly, her eyes flitting briefly toward the production team before returning to Caroline. The work we do is about inclusivity. It's about ensuring that people from all walks of life are treated with dignity and respect. This has always been my mission, and it always will be. But inclusivity doesn't mean that everyone's rights and freedoms are being respected. Caroline shoots back, her words punctuated with precision. What about the rights of American citizens who believe differently? The right to protect their borders, to reject ideologies they don't agree with? Are their voices not worth hearing in this conversation? Mary's expression remains neutral, but Caroline can sense the struggle in her eyes. I believe in dialogue, Mary says, almost as an afterthought, and I believe that everyone should be heard. But that doesn't mean we let hatred and discrimination define our society. The room is thick with disagreement, but Caroline refuses to let up. She continues, what happens when the voices of those who disagree with your worldview are drowned out by the very institutions that are supposed to be unbiased? Is that still the kind of society we want? The question hangs in the air, unanswered for a moment. It's clear that Caroline has struck a nerve. Mary shifts in her seat again, the discomfort becoming more visible. Everyone has a right to speak, Mary finally responds, but we also have a responsibility to challenge systems that harm the most vulnerable. Caroline nods thoughtfully, but she's not done yet. So let me ask you this. If you believe so strongly in challenging systems that harm people, then why have your organizations received millions of dollars in federal grants? Why does it seem that the very same funds meant to help the vulnerable are being used to promote political ideologies that alienate large segments of the population? The question is direct, and for a moment, Mary falters. The room is silent. The weight of Caroline's inquiry is undeniable. The world is watching, and the story unfolding before the cameras is one that could have major implications for both the political and religious landscapes. But Mary remains calm, her voice steady as she responds. We've received funding because we're doing important work, and that work will continue regardless of the criticisms. Caroline leans forward again, sensing that she's close to uncovering something more. But how much of that important work is really about advancing a political agenda? At what point do we stop pretending that these organizations aren't shaped by political ideologies? Karoline Leavitt's voice rings with authority as she continues her relentless pursuit of the truth. She knows that Mary and Buddy has more to answer for, and the stakes are higher than ever. The atmosphere in the studio grows tense, the studio lights creating a sharp contrast between the two women. Caroline poised and unyielding, and Mary calm but increasingly defensive. I'm not here to accuse you of wrongdoing, Bishop, Caroline presses, her eyes narrowing, but the connections between your church and the millions in federal funding are troubling. It's hard to ignore the fact that so much of the money being funneled into your programs seems to be linked to organizations with strong political leanings. Mary's gaze hardens, and she takes a deep breath, clearly searching for the right words. Caroline, I've dedicated my life to helping the poor, the marginalized, and those who are often forgotten by society. The funding we receive is critical to the success of these programs. It is not about politics, it's about compassion and the desire to make the world a better place. Caroline tilts her head, unconvinced. But Bishop, how do you explain the fact that many of the organizations you're linked to, particularly those receiving federal funds, have been accused of pushing a political agenda? Many people believe that your church's involvement in these movements, including support for issues like open borders, transgender rights, and abortion, isn't just about compassion, it's about shaping the nation's policies. At what point does your religion become entangled with partisan politics? The question lands with a force that makes the air in the room seem thicker. Mary tries to remain composed, but it's clear she's uncomfortable with the direction the interview is heading. She opens her mouth to respond but hesitates, trying to steady herself. The church has always been a place for change, Karoline. Mary begins slowly. It has always played a role in advocating for justice. The issues you're referring to, immigration, transgender rights, and others, are deeply intertwined with human rights. These are issues of love, dignity, and respect. As a religious leader, I cannot in good conscience ignore the cries of those in need. It is my duty to stand with them. Karoline, however, isn't letting Mary off the hook so easily. But is it your duty as a religious leader to use your position to influence government policy? Do you believe it's right to leverage the authority of your position for political change, especially when taxpayer money's involved? Isn't it dangerous when a church becomes a tool for advancing a political ideology? Mary recoils slightly, but her response is calm and firm. The issues I advocate for are moral issues, Karoline. They are not political. We're talking about basic human rights and the dignity of life. The funding we receive is a tool to help us do that. If people want to call it political, that's their right. But that's not what I'm doing here. Karoline leans forward, her expression unwavering. Then why do you think these accusations keep resurfacing? Why is it that so many people feel like your organization is pushing an agenda that has little to do with faith and everything to do with shaping the future of American society? The question is a direct hit. Mary's gaze falters for a moment, and she lowers her eyes briefly. She knows Karoline's line of questioning isn't just a challenge. It's a challenge to the very heart of her work. Sometimes, Mary begins, her voice tinged with emotion, change is difficult. People don't always understand it, and they push back. But that doesn't mean the change isn't necessary. We are here to serve the people who need us the most, not to cater to a political party or a set of political beliefs. Then why is it, Karoline counters sharply, that your organization is heavily involved in movements that are so politically charged? Why does your church's outreach program align so closely with the left-wing policies that are shaping today's political discourse? It's hard to ignore the fact that the rhetoric you use, the way you position yourself, seems to be very much a part of the political divide. Mary is silent for a moment, clearly gathering her thoughts. Karoline has exposed a vulnerability, and Mary knows she must tread carefully from here on. The stakes are higher than they've ever been. I understand the concerns, Karoline, Mary finally responds, her tone softer. But let me be clear, I do not use my position for political purposes. I use my position to help people. I use my platform to fight for justice. But do you realize, Karoline says, her voice steady, that by supporting certain political movements, you may be inadvertently alienating people who might benefit from your work, but who don't agree with your political views? You're pushing an agenda that goes beyond helping the marginalized and may be doing more harm than good in the long run. Mary sighs, a deep, weary sound. I don't see it that way. We're doing the right thing, Karoline. We're making the world a better place, one person at a time. The work we do transcends politics. And yet the funding that enables this work is tied to political interests, Karoline points out. That's the crux of the issue here. You can't separate your church's involvement in political movements from the very real implications that funding has on the programs you run. Mary's face flushes slightly, and for a moment, she looks almost vulnerable. I've never wanted to be involved in politics, she admits quietly. But when you see injustice, when you see people suffering, it's hard not to take a stand. I'm sorry if that comes across as political, but it's the reality of the world we live in. Karoline's expression softens for a moment, but only briefly. The reality is that when taxpayer money is involved, people have the right to know how it's being used. If you're using government funds to advance a specific political agenda, you're not just serving the people who need help, you're serving a political cause. The room falls into silence. The conversation has reached a pivotal moment, and Mary knows she's walking a fine line. Karoline has presented a case that's hard to ignore, and the pressure is mounting. Finally, Mary responds, her voice low but firm. All I can say is that the people we're helping, those who need us, they don't care about politics. They just want help, and that's what we're providing. Karoline looks directly into Mary's eyes. Then why not focus solely on that? Why not just focus on the work without the political baggage? The question hangs in the air. It's clear that Mary's journey, her faith, her work, her involvement in politics, has led her to a crossroads. As the camera zooms out, the interview is far from over. Karoline knows that there's more to uncover, and she's not done yet. Part 4. The Reckoning. The interview continues, but the tension in the room feels almost suffocating. Karoline Leavitt's voice, calm yet resolute, fills the space between her and Mary and Buddy. The studio lights seem brighter now, casting long shadows as the two women lock eyes. One in search of the truth, the other clinging to a narrative of compassion. Karoline senses the opening she's been waiting for. Her earlier questions have shaken Mary, but Karoline isn't finished yet. She leans forward again, her tone shifting slightly as she addresses the bishop's earlier statement about helping the marginalized. "Bishop Buddy," Karoline begins, her voice cutting through the air with purpose. "You've said time and time again that your focus is on compassion, on helping the vulnerable. But the truth is, the public is increasingly skeptical about how these funds are being allocated. The people you claim to protect may not be the ones benefiting from the millions in grants. Critics say the money isn't just helping people, it's furthering a political agenda. How do you respond to that?" Mary's expression falters briefly, but she quickly regains her composure. "I understand the concerns, Karoline, but these programs are for the good of all people, regardless of their background. We're not trying to push an agenda. We're trying to build a society where everyone has a voice. And yes, I've fought for many causes, but they're causes that matter. Immigration, LGBTQ+ rights, healthcare for the underprivileged. These are the issues that need attention." Karoline nods but remains unconvinced. "But you've also been accused of using your platform to silence dissenting voices, especially those who don't agree with your worldview. There's been talk of your church silencing conservative members who disagree with your stance on issues like abortion, immigration, and transgender rights. How do you reconcile that with your claim to represent compassion?" The bishop looks taken aback for a moment, clearly caught off guard. She leans forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "We're not silencing anyone, but let me ask you, Karoline, when a voice is used to perpetuate hatred or violence, when it's used to tear people apart, is that voice really worth listening to? My duty is to defend those who cannot defend themselves. That's what I do." Karoline's eyes narrow. She's heard this rhetoric before, but this time something doesn't add up. "But is it your place to decide which voices are worth hearing? Who gets to speak and who doesn't? What about the voices of those who disagree with your policies? Those who feel that open borders, the push for unrestricted transgender rights, and the defense of abortion are harmful to society? Are their opinions not valid?" Mary's lips tighten. She's clearly bristling at Karoline's line of questioning, but she doesn't break her gaze. "I don't believe in promoting hatred or division. I don't believe in attacking those who are already suffering. People who are marginalized, people who are oppressed, they don't have time to worry about the petty squabbles of politics. They need help." Karoline presses on, determined to get to the heart of the issue. "But you're operating in a political landscape, and when you accept millions of dollars in federal funding, it's impossible to ignore the political implications. These funds don't come without strings attached. The public wants to know how this money's being used and how much of it is going towards supporting causes that benefit the few rather than the many." The air grows even heavier. Mary's jaw tightens, but she holds her ground. "These funds are used to help the most vulnerable, immigrants, refugees, LGBTQ+ individuals, and others who have been marginalized. What we do is not for political gain. It's about making sure these people have a place in society, a place at the table." Karoline leans forward, her voice steady but firm. "Then why are so many of these organizations you're connected with, organizations receiving federal grants, also linked to left-wing political groups? Why is there so much overlap between the groups pushing for policies like open borders, unrestricted abortion, and transgender rights, and those receiving taxpayer funding through programs like USAID?" Mary hesitates for a fraction of a second. She's been caught in a bind, and Karoline knows it. The question has been asked, and it hangs in the air like a weight. These organizations are not pushing a political agenda, Karoline, she says, the words coming out a bit more quickly now, as though she's trying to regain control of the conversation. They're focused on helping people. What we are doing is addressing a human rights crisis, one that has been ignored for far too long. The fact that we receive support from progressive groups doesn't change the fact that we're helping people who need it. But can you see, Karoline counters, her voice unyielding, how it might look like the very political ideologies you support are being funded by American taxpayers? How some of these same taxpayers who may not agree with your stance are being forced to fund a movement they feel is undermining their values? Mary's face grows even more tense, her eyes flickering briefly to the side. The pressure is mounting, and Karoline can feel the shift. The bishop's calm is slipping, and it's evident that she's struggling to maintain the narrative she's been telling the public. "We are not undermining anyone's values," Mary says with a shaky breath. "We are simply standing up for what is right. I'm here because I believe in love, in acceptance, and in standing with those who are most in need. If people disagree with me, then that's their right. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop fighting for justice." Caroline's eyes soften for a moment, but she doesn't let up. "But Mary, this isn't just about fighting for justice. It's about the way these fights are being funded. You're using federal funds to support a set of beliefs that many Americans find deeply troubling, and that's a problem." The bishop sighs deeply, clearly exasperated. "I don't know what else to say, Karoline. We're doing what's right. We're helping people." Karoline nods, her voice softening just slightly. "Helping people isn't the problem, Bishop. It's how you're using the resources available to you to help them. And when those resources come from the public deserves to know how they're being spent." As the silence fills the room, Karoline knows the conversation is far from over. The truth is becoming clearer, but there's still more to uncover. Mary and Buddy's involvement with government funding, her connections to political ideologies, and the impact of her actions on the broader landscape are all pieces of a puzzle that is only just beginning to take shape. The camera zooms out as the interview reaches its midway point. Karoline's eyes never leave Mary's. The truth is out there, and Karoline is determined to find it, no matter where it leads. The tension in the studio is palpable as Karoline Leavitt and Mary and Buddy sit across from one another. Karoline's final question lingers in the air, a sharp challenge to the narrative that Mary has tried to uphold. "You've said that the work you do is about love and acceptance, Bishop," Karoline begins, her voice calm but firm. "But can you deny that your advocacy and the funds you receive are deeply entangled with political movements? And when those movements push divisive ideologies, don't you risk alienating the very people you claim to help?" Mary opens her mouth to respond but falters. The truth is inescapable, and she knows that Karoline has exposed the cracks in her carefully constructed narrative. The room is silent, the camera zooming in to capture the uncertainty in Mary's eyes. Karoline knows that this interview, this moment, may change the narrative forever. The truth has been laid bare. The question is, what will Mary do next? The silence in the studio is deafening. Karoline Leavitt leans back slightly in her chair, watching Mary and Buddy with a focused gaze. The tension between them has reached its peak. Mary, the once unshakable bishop, now seems visibly shaken. Her hands rest on the table, her fingers twitching slightly as she struggles to form a coherent response. For the first time in the interview, Karoline sees a crack in Mary's carefully curated facade of calmness. The words she has chosen to defend her actions now seem less certain, more fragile. "Bishop Buddy, I appreciate your dedication to helping those in need," Karoline continues, her tone softer but no less incisive. "But it's hard to ignore the bigger picture here. The funds you've received, the programs you've supported, there's a growing perception that these efforts are tied to a political agenda, and that's something the American people need to understand." Mary shifts uncomfortably in her seat. She knows Karoline is right. The pieces of the puzzle are too numerous and too clear to ignore. This is no longer just about defending a faith or an ideology. It's about accountability. "I've never claimed to be perfect, Karoline," Mary says, her voice strained. "I do what I believe is right. I fight for the marginalized. That's what matters to me." Karoline nods, but she's not backing down. But what happens when those you're trying to help are caught in the crossfire of political ideologies they don't support? When your actions, even though well-intentioned, serve to further divide the country? Is that really helping people? There's a long pause before Mary answers. I don't know what else to say, she admits quietly. I'm trying to do good. I always have. Karoline leans in slightly, her voice resolute. The truth is, Bishop Buddy, the good you're trying to do is overshadowed by the politics that are shaping the narrative. And that's the issue the public needs to understand. The camera zooms in on Mary one final time. She's no longer the confident religious leader she once seemed, but a woman backed into a corner. Karoline's questions have exposed more than just a political agenda. They've uncovered the deep, uncomfortable intersection between faith, politics, and money. The interview ends, but Karoline's voice lingers in the air. The story is far from over, and the reckoning has just begun.